I feel like we are currently in a horror comedy renaissance, which I was not expecting going into 2025, and I'm not necessarily like the biggest horror comedy person, but I'm kind of digging it. We've been getting some really good films in this subgenre. Hello everybody, my name is Kat, and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. And today we are talking about the latest Osgood Perkins film, The Monkey. This is of course the follow-up to Perkins' huge horror hit of last year, Longlegs. And if you've been following my channel for a while now, you may know that I was not the biggest Longlegs fan. It definitely had its positives, but I do agree with the overall criticisms of it in terms of just its narrative structuring. That being said, while it wasn't necessarily my favorite film of last year, there was definitely enough good things in that movie to prove that Osgood Perkins can be a very competent filmmaker. So when this film was announced right after the success of Longlegs, my first response was not necessarily to be jumping up and down with excitement. Once the trailer started coming out for it and it seemed like it was going to have a much more darker comedic tone, I became a lot more interested in the film. And I've said this in other videos as well, that I feel like Osgood Perkins would be really good at doing a horror comedy, only because I feel like that kind of fits his personality. Like when you watch interviews with him, he does seem like a really fun guy to hang out with. He's a guy I would just love to like grab a beer with and talk horror films. And in his interviews, it's always seemed like he's had this drier sense of humor, like doesn't take things too seriously. And it could be argued that you can find evidence of his dark humor in aspects of Longlegs, but for the most part, Longlegs felt like it wanted to take itself very seriously, whereas The Monkey from the trailers just felt like a very different tone. And so I was really excited to see how he was going to handle working within this subgenre. I'm happy to say, in fact, that The Monkey is a really good time. I had a lot of fun with this film. If you see this like thing sticking up here, I just bought a new plant that I have to figure out where to hang. So it's just hanging out in this table next to me. Anyway, this film follows two brothers, they are twin brothers, who one day while going through their estranged father's belongings, they find this toy monkey. And the whole idea is that when they wind this monkey up and it starts playing its drums, it plays its little song, and then from there it decides to kill someone. And usually killing someone in a very violent, very over-the-top way. It feels very similar to something you might see in like a Final Destination movie, for example. Just really over-the-top freak accident kind of things. And the brothers discover the monkey has this power. They try to see if they can get the monkey to kill specific people that they want to see dead, although what they quickly find out is that the monkey has a mind of its own and it just kills whoever it feels like in the moment. And sometimes it is people that the boys don't like, but more often than not, it tends to be loved ones, which ends up causing a lot of trauma and grief and friction between the brothers. And it is a story that does follow them from when they are children to when they are adults. And yeah, Osgood Perkins nails the dark comedy here. Now, this is based off of a short story by Stephen King, and I was going to try to read the short story before seeing the film. Unfortunately, this week just got hectic, and I thought I was gonna have a little bit more time before seeing the film, but I ended up being able to go to an early screening of it. Just ran out of time, didn't get a chance to read the short story. However, I do know from some of you out there that have left comments that some of you are really big fans of the short story. I know for some people it was like a story that they read growing up that definitely had an impact on them. So I'm curious, for those of you out there that are fans of the short story, what you're going to think about the film, because my understanding is that Osgood Perkins did take some creative liberties.
The short story isn't a movie, like it's not a complete thing. It's sort of a setup. And so I really took a lot of liberty with the picture.
I don't think the short story is as comedic as what you get in the film. So tonally, I'm not sure if it's going to feel off for those of you that are fans of the short story. The tonal thing might be true too if you're someone that is not necessarily a fan of horror comedies. I haven't seen all of Osgood Perkins' films, but it seems like the majority of his filmography is more of the dark, nihilistic, Longlegs vibes. And so if that's what you are into, this is a complete tonal shift, so it might not work for everyone. There are moments where it is poking fun at the Stephen King tropes. It doesn't go completely into parody territory, though that was one of the other things I was wondering about when the film first started, because there are like some characters that are named after very popular Stephen King characters, but it might be that all of the characters here are named after other characters in Stephen King properties, I'm not sure. So you do definitely have some of the references here and there, but it's not parody, nor is it really trying to do what something like Hard Eyes was doing last week, where it's trying to like subvert the tropes and making fun of them in this very loving way. So for that reason, I feel like the comedy here will work for more people than something like Hard Eyes, which was definitely leaning very heavily into playing with the romantic comedy tropes, which I know that not everyone was a fan of that, which I totally get. Whereas here, I feel like the comedy is more in line with something like, I don't know, Return of the Living Dead is the first thing that's like coming to my mind. And again, it's also a lot more gorier than something like a Hard Eyes, which I feel like will probably appeal to more people as well. And I think another reason why the comedy works so well in this film is because of the editing. Like, the editing in this film is really top notch. The comedy is in them setting up something and then immediately cutting to the next scene where you see the outcome of what that setup is, but you don't actually see in between stuff, if that makes sense. You'll be in a scene with a character and they have this sudden realization that this other character that's in the scene with them is going to die, and you have that moment of them reaching out to trying to stop it. You have a thing of them turning to their character and being like, hey, look out, but before they can like finish getting out that sentence, it immediately cuts to the next scene and you're at the funeral of the other character. That's a poor way of explaining it, but it's like that kind of humor. There's also some really funny cameos in the film. I don't want to say who it is. I know that this film doesn't come out officially for another week or so, but I would say try to avoid reading anything about this film and don't get it spoiled for you, because there's like 2 cameos in here that are hilarious and are just so delightful when they happen. And I do think it keeps the typical Oz Perkins dark nihilistic tone. Like, there is definitely this overarching theme here around this monkey just being this personification of death. Death is this natural part of life. It's a very scary part of life. Death doesn't really care if you're a good person or all the effort that you take to take care of yourself and be healthy. Like, it can hit any of us at any time. And I think we see this being represented in the fact that you have characters that come in contact with this monkey toy and are trying to bargain with it in some way. And the fact that the toy doesn't care. It doesn't care about your personal feelings. It's just going to kill whoever it wants to. So this kind of absurdity around death and just the fact that it can like hit at any time. It's exploring these existential ideas in this comedic way. Along with exploring these ideas around death, there's also heavy themes here about family, specifically the relationships between fathers and sons. Throughout the film, you are dealing with several male characters who are struggling in the fact that they're growing up without having any kind of real father figures in their lives, or fathers that, again, are very estranged, that are not in their sons' lives, that have these like weird secrets to them. You definitely see the impact on like the wives, and the fact that you have the wives that are always complaining about the husbands and being like, oh yeah, well, he's off somewhere sleeping with some other woman. In a similar vein to Longlegs, dealing with themes around family trauma and how that gets passed on throughout the generations. The monkey figure you can read as a personification of death. I think you could also read it as a personification of these family traumas or anxieties that just stay with you for years on end, no matter how much you try to get away from it. This whole idea, like, you can't run away from your past, and the monkey very much being representative of that, and the fact that it'll just keep popping up at random times. And this theme around family and secrets and trauma, these are themes that, again, were also there in Longlegs. And what's interesting is, if you look into Oz Perkins, he's given a lot of interviews about what his life was like growing up and his relationship with his dad. And for anyone that doesn't know at this point, he is the son of Anthony Perkins, who plays Norman Bates in the iconic Psycho. And he's given a lot of interviews talking about his dad and weirdness around growing up in a Hollywood household, being the child of a parent that is within that industry and does have that attention on them. And also talking about the fact that his father, for most of his lifetime, was in the closet, but the people close to him knew what was going on. And when you read interviews with Osgood Perkins, he talks about the fact that growing up there was this kind of sense about like his parents trying to like keep together this facade for the public, but there just being something kind of off in the private life, and that there was something else going on there that he was cognizant of but didn't really understand what it was, and just the kind of weird dissonance of that. And so I think that's why he's really interested in exploring these ideas in his films around things like estrangement, not having the full picture of like what's going on in your family, right? Again, having this kind of strange burden that's there, but you don't really know why it's there or where it even came from. Again, I think the monkey toy in this film is definitely meant to represent that. I know that that was a theme that he was really trying to explore in Longlegs as well. It was a thing like after I read an interview with him and him talking about all of this, I was able to understand Longlegs better and kind of the general feeling he was trying to get across. In terms of just expressing these ideas and these emotions, I think he succeeds a lot better in The Monkey. Like, I feel like in Longlegs the message was a little muddy, whereas I feel like in The Monkey, like, that message is very like crystal clear. And even if you had no idea about Oz Perkins or his personal life going into it, I think these themes still come through very loud and clear. And I feel like the resolution of these themes as well is articulated a lot better in The Monkey. Interesting guy, interesting backstory. Also, while doing this research on Oz Perkins after seeing Longlegs, I also had no idea that he was in Legally Blonde, the guy that's kind of part of Elle Wood's gang when she goes to Harvard, right? The kind of like nerdy guy that she defends at the end of the film.
Why didn't you call me?
I'm sorry?
Sorry for what? For breaking my heart or for giving me the greatest pleasure I've ever known?
Both?
I love horror films. I'm a horror girly, it's my favorite genre, but Legally Blonde is in like my top 5 favorite films of all time. I watched that movie on loop as a kid, and his character was always one of my favorites, so to have that like discovery that that's who he is, like that just completely blew my mind. It's like, okay, you're in Legally Blonde, your dad is Norman Bates. Like, I'm kind of low-key obsessed with Oz Perkins, because even if I'm not the biggest fan of everything that he comes out with, I still really appreciate that he is this director that is like going to take chances and is going to create these really weird worlds. And I feel like he's really good at like world building in his films and just creating a vibe, but he's turning into a director where I'm really fascinated to just see what he's going to do next. Again, narrative-wise, I do feel like this was definitely stronger than Longlegs. This one just had a better through line throughout. It had the same consistent tone throughout the whole film. And I'm sure part of that is probably the fact that he is adapting a Stephen King story, so the structure of it, I know he took creative liberties with it, but the structure of the story is at least there. Because yeah, I feel like with Longlegs, and again, I think there's more positive to say about that film than there are negatives. I just feel like it was wanting to be a serial killer story and a supernatural story at the same time, and I just feel like by the third act it didn't quite gel those two things together. My biggest problem with the narrative in that film is that when you get to the third act and we're at the climax moment, like the climax is just kind of this one big long flashback scene that has a lot of exposition in it. And it's exposition that kind of explains what's going on, but also opens the doors to more questions that could also be seen as plot holes depending on who you're asking. It just had one of those endings where I walked out of the film and was like, huh? Whereas here with The Monkey, again, I feel like had a very strong ending to it. The film ended in a very comedic way and people were laughing, and you could tell that everyone walking out of the theater had a good time with what they just experienced. What I think is also good for Stephen King adaptation, because Stephen King is another artist that can sometimes create endings that make you go, huh? And when his sometimes esoteric, strange, almost Lovecraftian-like endings try to be put on film, it doesn't always work a lot of the times. I've always said the best Stephen King adaptations come from those directors that can take the bones of the story and the themes, but create something of their own. And knowing when to like lean into the Stephen King weirdness and when to pull back. So again, I haven't read the short story, but I would say as far as like Stephen King films go, I would definitely put this one in the bucket of like my favorite films that are based off of his properties. I also feel like too with Longlegs, I feel like the explanation for the supernatural stuff, it was kind of weird because In some ways, I feel like the film over-explained what was happening, but again, still opened up the door for more questions. Like, I still feel like I still don't completely understand what was going on in that movie. Something with devil balls. There was more to it than that. It was like kind of a thing where the motivations and the actions of the supernatural entity just felt a little convoluted. Whereas here, like, we don't have that problem. And it's a film that isn't really interested in giving you like the clear-cut answers. And I feel like for a film in which the main evil entity is this toy monkey playing the drums, like, yeah, I don't need like an over explanation of that. And again, because I feel like the narrative and the themes were stronger here, for me, I just read the monkey as more as this like metaphorical figure for all of these other kind of themes that Oz Perkins is exploring within the film. I will say, as far as aesthetics go, I would probably lean more to Longlegs. I mean, Longlegs just had some like really gorgeous cinematography to it. And those moments in the film where it goes to like that old footage and it's so eerie and so creepy, and I love that imagery so much. I said in my review of Longlegs, like, I could have just done with a film where it was just like that imagery for like an hour and a half. But I feel like the vibes of Longlegs is definitely creepier and eerie. And I feel like it has a slightly stronger aesthetic than what we get in The Monkey. The visuals here are still good, but it didn't stand out in the way that it did with Longlegs. That being said, I do think there's some really beautiful shots in here. I mean, this is a Stephen King film, so of course we get scenes in Maine. And so there's some like some wide shots of like this small New England town. And as someone that grew up in small New England town, it had a very like homey feel to it. It was like, oh, that kind of looks like the place that I grew up in. That being said, as far as the technical aspects of it go, the gore is really the shining star of this movie. I mean, you've got intestines flying out all over the place. You've got heads being bashed in. My favorite moment is a scene that happens at that hotel location that you see in the trailer. That was a lot of fun. That was very impressive. Again, it's very gross, but also very comedic at the same time. It's a film that's a lot of fun to watch with an audience, and just seeing how the audience reacts to the violent deaths. You can tell that Oz Perkins is having a lot of fun making this film. There's a lot of like loud birds outside my window right now. Again, I think if you're more into his darker tone films, maybe you'll like this one, maybe it won't be your favorite. Go into it without reading anything about it. Don't buy into like the hype. I know that there's already a lot of articles out there about like, oh, the best Stephen King adaptation of all time. Avoid all of the AI generated headlines. Just go into the movie expecting to have a good time. I think this is a perfectly suitable matinee or a film that you can just see after a long day at work. That's how I saw it. I went to it straight after work, and it gave me some like much needed laughs and joy. So those are my thoughts on The Monkey. Again, I had a good time with it. I would say out of all of the horror comedies that I've seen the past few weeks, it's probably my favorite, with Hard Eyes being a very close second. Let me know what you think of the film in the comments down below. And I know we're going to be getting into a bit of a lull period in terms of theatrical horror releases. I'm actually not even sure what's coming out next. I know that there's a few films on streaming that are going to be coming out, specifically on like Shudder. So I'll probably do a review of some of those films that are going to be coming out within the next few days, within the next like week or two. But until then, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time.